It's a declaration of war. That is, the Russian assets, the frozen Russian assets, tampering with that property, its expropriation, it is a declaration of war. Amid the European Union's push to use frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine's war effort, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban issued a strong statement in an interview with Patriota on December 16. Orban said European leaders now need access to frozen Russian assets in order to prevent what he described as the potential collapse of their own governments, according to reports by RT. Orban claimed that after spending more than $118 billion on Ukraine, the European Union is now hoping to confiscate Russian assets to continue funding its commitments. The Hungarian Prime Minister said EU leaders had earlier assured voters that the war in Ukraine would not cost them a single penny. Orban warned that if taxpayers are ultimately forced to foot the bill, it could trigger the collapse of several governments across the European Union. He added that the EU is now attempting to target Russian assets in order to secure funding from sources outside taxpayers' pockets. Orban's remarks came after the European Union agreed on December 12 to indefinitely freeze Russian central bank reserves held within the bloc. This decision means Russian assets worth more than $230 billion will now remain blocked across the European Union for an unlimited period. The EU invoked Article 122, a provision that allows decisions to be approved by a qualified majority rather than requiring unanimous consent. Previously, the immobilization of Russian assets had to be renewed every 6 months with the agreement of all 27 EU member states. This arrangement carried the risk that Kremlin-friendly countries within the bloc, including Hungary, could veto the measure. The new decision followed an announcement by Russia's central bank that it was filing a lawsuit against Euroclear. Euroclear, the Belgian central securities depository, holds the majority of frozen Russian assets located in Europe. The lawsuit claims that Euroclear's actions have caused damage to the Russian central bank's fund management operations. The European Union has also been pushing for a reparations loan for Ukraine that would be secured against frozen Russian assets. Belgium has been blocking this plan, citing fears of legal challenges and the possible seizure of Belgian assets in Russia. Italy, Bulgaria, and Malta have also pushed for alternatives to the proposed loan, according to Euractiv. The European Union is expected to discuss the legal process surrounding the reparations loans at a summit scheduled for December 21st.
Ez a korszak véget ért az Európai Unió történetében.
This era has ended in the history of the European Union. And the decision you mentioned, bypassing Hungary, violating it in broad daylight, openly on the street, bypassing Hungary to reach for Russian assets, of course, it hurts us primarily because it marks the end of the illusion that the rule of law prevails in Brussels. Let's say the interpretation of the law has always been in their hands, so we started at a disadvantage. But still, you couldn't just close the founding, the cabinets, throw them aside. That's what's happening now. But this decision is extremely important from another perspective, beyond the Hungarian viewpoint. It's a declaration of war. That is, the Russian assets, the frozen Russian assets, tampering with that property, its expropriation, is a declaration of war. I have never seen a situation where taking away 200 to 300 billion euros from a country did not provoke some sort of retaliatory actions. There is no such thing. Because a person lets their little money be taken, the whole country gets looted. This cannot be allowed. So we are in a very serious moment, and your observation is undoubtedly accurate that the war-related gatherings we now hold them almost week by week, but none are boring, and none are like the previous ones, because something always happens. The conditions and situations are deteriorating at such a speed. Russian, I would say a few words if you allow me, since earlier I talked about understanding complex things. I'm sure you hear a lot about it, but you might not know what it is. Now, the international practice in peacetime is that every country has a foreign exchange reserve. This means that there is their own money because let's say Hungarians have the forint, but the forint is not accepted if we want to pay in other countries. So we convert a part of our wealth to currencies that are accepted, mostly dollars or euros. And this is in the case our currency loses value. We use complex operations to protect the forint. This is called a foreign exchange reserve. Every country has one. And according to international financial regulations, it is usually, in fact, mandatory that you cannot keep it in your own country. So the foreign exchange reserve must always be held in another secure country. Now of course it's hard to imagine that in the meantime the Russians are negotiating with the Americans, and more than 200 billion euros is on the table, then the well-trained Russian president, equipped with proper knowledge, from the old world, and the world's some of the best businessmen are negotiating with each other, while 200 billion euros lie there unclaimed. What I mean by this is that one of the key questions in the Russian-American negotiations is what to do with this money. Moreover, the Russians and the Americans have already agreed on what to do with this money. There are publicly disclosed documents about this, so I'm not saying this based on peeking through the keyhole, but because there are written documents. And in this, the Europeans were not given a say. Moreover, the Europeans are not clinging to this sum of money by chance, because the Europeans, excuse the expression, have been feeding your own citizens from Spain to Denmark for years now, but you don't need to worry, dear Spaniards and Danes, people like you here in the stands, who only encounter politics tangentially. Don't worry, because supporting Ukraine and the Ukrainian war won't cost us Europeans a penny in the end. So feel free to support the war, because nothing will take money from your pockets, but we will fund the war from the frozen Russian assets. And the Europeans believed this. Of course, we Hungarians didn't believe it. We've seen this before. Such things an intelligent person doesn't believe, but Westerners are not like us. They are not as educated in subjects like historical turmoil, and that's why they believe this. They believe in such things. And now it turns out that the monkey jumps into the water, and now European leaders have to admit that, well, you'll be paying for the war. Until now we said no, but if this money is not available, you will be paying for the war, from Denmark to Portugal. And you will not only be paying now, even your grandchildren will be paying, because we have taken out loans that we cannot repay. And the interest on those, well, your children will be paying that. This will be revealed now. That is why the entire European elite is in fear. From the German Chancellor to the Slovenian Prime Minister. Because the truth will come out. And if it turns out that there really is no money, and it truly cannot be paid from that, but must instead come out of one's own pocket, that will be disgraceful. Although they are Germans in the sense that they are already among us, right? So they are practically already us. But actually, 3 Germans are leading here. And they are leading the Union off track, I think, or driving it into a wall. The German Chancellor, Mr. Weber, the leader of the largest faction in the European Parliament, and Ursula von der Leyen, who is the President of the Commission. This is a German issue. And they think that either the Russian money is there, or it isn't. And either the war ends, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't end, then more money will be needed, and money must be sent to Ukraine from somewhere, so that it doesn't cause a political upheaval at home. That's why they never say to pool the money that goes to Ukraine. I always say, well, if we want to finance the war, then let's get the paperwork ready, and the pencils, and calculate how much goes to the Germans, the Belgians, see whether you can or want to chip in. But they don't do that. Instead, they say they collect some money and use it as collateral to take out loans.